So carbohydrates. Most people think that I'm totally against carbohydrates because I do so much promotion of low carb diets. So I thought that it would be a really interesting topic today to actually address carbohydrates, because carbohydrates tends to be something that a lot of people are very emotional and passionate about as well. If I show you a nice picture of a beautiful loaf of bread, or if I show you a picture of some cake or some scones with cream and stuff, right? See, I can already see the few people that I can see on the screen, they're already starting to grin at me. So we have a very emotional relationship with carbohydrates, and that's one of the things that I wanted to deal with today, actually, because I wanted to just explain the function of carbohydrates in our body, the different types of carbohydrates, because yes, not all carbohydrates are bad, definitely not. And please don't believe that that's what I think that they are.
Is your mom eating chips? I just need to ask, is your mom eating potato chips during this?
She might be. What's she eating, Ma? She's eating rice crackers.
Rice crackers.
Oh, okay. Mom!
Very healthy. Very healthy.
And then, of course, afterwards as well, please feel free to ask me some questions. I'm sure we're going to get into a discussion about what's a good carbohydrate and what's not a good carbohydrate. Remember, you know, everything that I expressed here today is my opinion based on what I've researched. So yeah, this is a presentation where I want to kind of put a disclaimer that I'm not anti-carbohydrates. I'm really not. Okay, so here we go. If I can, yes, okay. So what are carbohydrates? Well, we all know about the 3 macronutrients, right? It gets thrown away and thrown around in nutrition science so much these days. So you've got fat, protein, and carbs. And a lot of nutrition has been oversimplified into those 3 macronutrients. So a lot of people believe that, you know, that's the only thing that's important. And, you know, we have a whole movement of diets and belief systems now, which are called counting your macros. And that's basically just manipulating the percentages of certain macronutrients in your diet. Now, before we go ahead, we can't really break down all foods into that's only a carb, that's only a protein, and that's only a fat, because 99% of foods are a combination of the 3. They have a level of carbs, a level of fat, and a level of protein, with the exclusion of something like an oil, which is 100% fat. But carbohydrates are one of the 3 macronutrients, and it is the preferred energy source for the central nervous system, also for the muscles, and for other energy systems in the body. So I want to say that it is the preferred source. So it's the source that is most easily utilized by your body. Okay, so keeping that in mind. So there are 3 different types of carbohydrates. So the first one is your sugars. The next one is called your starches. So the sugars tend to be sweet. The starches are not sweet. And then we have fiber. And fiber is the one thing that most of us forget is a carbohydrate. However, fiber has a really, really important role, or multiple important roles in the body. The difference between the 3 are in terms of elevating blood sugar at different rates, to the point where fiber actually doesn't elevate blood sugar at all. But if you look at something like a sugar versus a starch, the difference is in the breakdown in your body. A sugar is much more simple and much more easy for your body to digest. A starch requires a number of different steps before it is broken down into simple sugars. So it's a whole bunch of different sugars put together in one molecule, and then that all needs to be broken down so that it can be utilized as energy in the body. And then fiber is plant cellulose. So it's basically a molecule that our bodies cannot digest. That's why it has no impact. Fiber is found, of course, mostly in fruits and vegetables, but plants, it's all plants, right? Because it's cellulose. It doesn't occur in animal-based foods. And fiber is something that is incredibly important for your microbiome. And we've spoken about the microbiome quite a lot over the past weeks, but it's basically your internal garden, your internal flora. It's all of the beneficial bacteria that you have inside your body, fungus and bacteria. And it is something that is absolutely necessary to live. It sounds gross, but you carry around with you every time you go for a walk about 2 to 3 kilos of little happy bacteria with you that help you do lots of things. These days, people don't get grossed out by it so much anymore. But if you told somebody that 10 years ago, they would have freaked out. Because we were conditioned to believe that all bacteria were bad, right? We didn't realize that there were good and bad bacteria. And one way that you can feed the happy little bacteria that live inside your digestive tract is by giving them fiber. And they break it down through their digestion process. And their digestion process can sometimes have a little bit of a side effect, which is releasing a little bit of gas, which is why you might feel a little gassy after eating certain plant foods. Namely, the beans get a good, they get a good reputation for being the musical fruit. Even though, and it's not necessarily that what we were led to believe for a number of years was that we don't digest them very well. It's not necessarily that, it's also that our gut bacteria are doing the digestion for us, and they're getting a little bit musical as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it disagrees with you, but it may be a little uncomfortable sometimes, especially if you have a little bit of gas gathering and you can feel a bit of bloating and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily means that that food doesn't work for you. It just means it's working for your gut bacteria. Okay, so you guys understand the 3 different types. Now, in terms of training, and that's always a really interesting thing. So your sugars are going to be really quickly absorbed into your body and ready to use as muscle fuel the fastest. Starches are going to be something that is more of a long-lasting energy, slow digesting carbs. We get that. Complex carbohydrates. We get that all the time, right? In messaging, on advertising and stuff, it's a good source of complex carbohydrates. It keeps your energy going for longer, right? You guys all recognize that, a lot of breakfast cereals use that as a tagline. So yeah, that's what your starches are. And then fiber, our bodies can't really deal with it. So it's not really an energy source until the gut bacteria have dealt with it. And when you're talking about the time that food takes to go down your digestive tract, and obviously that depends on the type of food that it is. And it also depends very much on our genetics and physiology as well, because transit time for food can take anywhere from between 24 to 72 hours to go through the system. And, you know, like I have a lot of friends that are just like, oh my gosh, my lunch went straight through me. That's usually not the case at all. If you do have a big meal, then sometimes it's your body's reaction, well, I've just taken on a whole lot, let me release some as well. But it's not the food that you just ate. It's not possible unless, of course, you get food poisoning and your body's trying to get rid of stuff, dump stuff out of the digestive system. It's not possible that it was 2 or 3 hours before it came out of you again. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, this is, you know, some energy might be released by the bacteria from the fiber, but that wouldn't be utilized for a long time afterwards. Okay, so what do carbs do in our body? And I want to make a real distinction here between carbohydrates that you eat and carbohydrates that your body is actually able to manufacture as well. So this is true for all carbohydrates. So they provide fuel for the central nervous system. They provide energy for working muscles. They also prevent protein from being used as an energy source, which is what we're concerned with when somebody is chronically not being nourished and the body has no more sources of carbohydrate. And sources of carbohydrate for the body would be either food or body fats. And then once all of that runs out, then the body can break down protein and recycle it into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, which happens in the liver. And this is something that a lot of people are very concerned with low carbohydrate diets. But remembering that carbohydrates can come from your diet or something that is not as efficient for the body, but definitely what it was meant for is the breakdown of fat in the body, which is actually stored carbohydrate in the first place, right? We know that if we eat more energy than we utilize, then the excess energy is going to be stored in the body, and the storage mode for the body is fat. We all know that, right? So what happens is if we run out of body fats and we don't add any carbohydrates to our diet, then the body will turn to protein. And the protein that it will turn to is your muscles. But this only really happens in starvation. So carbs are essential to the body for energy. The source of the carbohydrate, that is the thing that could be either body fat or dietary carbohydrate. And of course, carbohydrates enable fat metabolism when we eat them in excess. When we eat too many carbohydrates, then it sets off a chain of reactions in the body that go, hey, there's too much of this, let's go to storage mode, right? Which is our survival. That's the reason that humans have lasted as long as they have, right? Because in terms of times where there was excess food, we were able to eat and store. And if we didn't eat for 2 days, it didn't matter, or eat for a week even, it didn't matter because we had our storage. So it's important to remember that sources of carbohydrates in the body are not necessarily dietary sources. Okay. Let's move on to the next one, which is the digestion of carbohydrates. So the digestion of carbohydrates actually already starts with your saliva, right? Simple sugars already start getting digested. And that's also, it already triggers a mechanism in the body. And that's why artificial sweeteners can also be an issue with us, right? Because it's that sweet taste that starts to trigger processes in the body. So when you have sugar that isn't sugar, your body still thinks that it's getting sugar initially because of the taste receptors on your tongue. So it starts to kick off all of the processes that are going to happen if you were to have taken on sugar. The problem is, if you didn't take on any sugar, then the body's going to go, where's my sugar? You promised me sugar. This is false advertising. You know, this is like putting fitness on a cereal box. So yeah, that's just a bit of a side note, but that's where it already starts to get digested. And then there are various steps as you go through your digestive system where certain different types of sugars. So the simple sugars will start to be digested in your mouth, and then in your stomach and in your intestines, that's where, you know, other carbohydrates, more complex carbohydrates are going to start to get broken down and then released into the blood. So basically it gets eaten, the body releases that carbohydrate in the form of sugar, because obviously it has to digest everything down to simple sugars, which is what the body can use. And then that gets taken into the bloodstream, because the bloodstream is the mechanism how we can get it to our cells. Now, when it gets into the bloodstream, we need to be able to let it into the cells. And the mechanism that lets it into the cells, like a little key that goes into a lock to open the door, is insulin. Now, we hear a lot about insulin these days. There's a lot of what's called insulin sensitivity. There's a lot of people who have problems regulating insulin, and of course, diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, are issues with insulin. Type 1 diabetes obviously being the disease where there is no production of insulin, and type 2 diabetes, of course, being the point where the insulin receptors at our cell doors, at the little keys, they get so resistant to insulin that they don't work properly anymore. So opening the door and letting the sugar into the cell doesn't work anymore, which means that the blood sugar stays high. And that is what you have to watch out with in terms of insulin resistance, which is by far and away one of the greatest health problems that has ever troubled us here. And also, interestingly, one of the main risk factors for having harmful consequences with COVID-19 as well, right? It is actually one of the biggest risk factors. If you have insulin resistance, then you are at much bigger risk of having serious implications of COVID-19 than if you are not. So that's really interesting, right? We've never had so much insulin resistance before as a population, and then suddenly there is a virus that ends up picking on the people with the insulin resistance. So it's very important to kind of look at what's happening with insulin in the body. And so insulin what it does is it also signals the liver, the muscle, and the fat cells to take in glucose, but it also helps to start the process of the storage. Now, we all think of storing fat as being a bad thing, but, you know, from a survival sense, it's actually an amazing thing. The human race survived because of this. It really was just because we were able to store, you know, like camels are able to store. That's the only reason that we survived. You know, long winters and periods of food, periods of famine, that kind of thing. Like, we are able to survive because of this. The only thing is, these days, there's too much. food around. So there's too much opportunity to store and not enough opportunity to burn. And we've spoken about that in a lot of the seminars that I've done as well, that it's also about the amount of times that you trigger this insulin. So the amount of times that you eat during a day is also very important in terms of triggering insulin. Now, pretty much all foods, because they're a combination of different macronutrients, will trigger an insulin response, a level up in the blood sugar. And actually, if you eat a lot of protein, so if you do a high protein diet, the body goes like, oh, okay, there's only protein coming in. Let us break that down into carbohydrate as well, because that's also possible, right? So eating too much protein is also a way of spiking blood sugar. Of course, it's not as quick as just having some sugar, but it can also trigger higher blood sugar levels. So if the body has sufficient energy, insulin signals the liver to take up glucose and store it as glycogen. And then once the glycogen reserves, so we have glycogen reserves in our muscles and in our liver. Once all of those reserves are full, that's when we start to store the energy as fat as well. And it is the case that if you continually have this oversupply, that the body takes a little bit of time to store it as well, and you get what's called, when you start to convert carbohydrate into fats, there is this molecule that is made in the liver called a triglyceride. Okay, that should pique most people's memory, because triglycerides is something that they really look at when you go for a cholesterol test as well. Have you guys had that done? If you have a blood test, they look at triglycerides as well. And high triglyceride count means that your liver is very busy with converting excess carbohydrate or excess energy into body fat. And triglycerides, if they sit around in your bloodstream for too long, can also cause problems. Now, triglycerides, if there is a lot of triglyceride, you can actually utilize that as an energy fuel as well, right? It just takes a few more steps than what a simple sugar would take. But a triglyceride is actually a whole bunch of carbohydrates that the liver has put together ready for storage as fat. So it's high density. But you break it back down into carbohydrates. And that's the thing to remember, that fats are just very, very, very tightly woven carbohydrates. So, it's all part of the same thing. So let me just move on to the next thing, which is high blood sugar. And high blood sugar is something that, that we need to talk about here. It's called hyperglycemia. And hypoglycemia is blood sugar, which is something that a lot of people think that they suffer from, but it's actually misdiagnosed a lot of the times as well, because your body is actually able to manufacture carbohydrates for use in the body from itself, from its fat stores. So if you end up with too low a blood sugar, your body will start to break down fats back into its original state, which was a carbohydrate, and then put it back into the blood. Now, it doesn't always happen smoothly, because like all of our body's processes, it all needs to be trained. The more you do it, the better your body gets at it, right? So if you have always been someone that keeps fueling yourself with dietary carbohydrate, which was really the dietary advice that we've been given for years, which was just eat 7 small meals a day so that you keep your energy levels going, right? Now, what did that mean? It meant that the body never got into a state where it needed to access our body fat. And it is the point that if you never access your body fat, then you'll only store and you'll never burn it. And if you never burn it, your body forgets how to burn it because it never has to burn it. So what are the ways that you can start to burn your body fat? Well, you have to create a deficit of carbohydrates so that the body has a requirement for it, right? So that means that you have to not eat plus utilize all of the free carbohydrate and glycogen that's around. Now, I don't know if you mind me using you as an example, Lisa. She's like, what? No, it was just something that you said at lunch the other week. So, oh, hang on.
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah, you're okay. Yeah. So we were having a discussion at lunch, and I think it was, we went to the Cheesecake Factory. So I think the discussion centered around having cheesecake. But Lisa said something to me, which was, you know, these days she basically only really eats one meal a day, not really too much more than that, because of her reduced requirement for energy these days. What she finds is that her body doesn't need the same amount of energy that it used to need, and that it's very easy for her to start putting on weight if she eats, 3 meals a day. And that is pretty much the case for everyone as they start getting older as well. If you consistently eat all the time, like we always saw this phenomenon, and it was always blamed on menopause, that women would start to just put on more and more weight, right? But it's more that you never get into a situation after years and years and years of ever needing to break down your fat stores. And then that accelerates as your number of calories that you utilize in a day decrease because your tissues aren't growing as much and aren't regenerating as much anymore. You may still be doing the same amount of exercise or more exercise than you used to do, especially, like when it was a time where maybe, you were busy with family or busy with work or something like that. And then it gets really frustrating for people to think that suddenly, I'm doing more work than I used to, but now I don't burn as much. And that is because when we are younger, our cell tissues are actually regenerating at a much quicker rate than what they do when we're older. So there's less processes going on in the body. So that's one thing to remember as well. We do not need to have as many calories as we did when we were younger. And I think, most women notice that, even between 20 and 30, right? You already notice a great difference between your metabolism. Yeah, I know, right? It's when it starts. So if I ate what I ate in my 20s, oh my goodness, yeah. So that's something that's really important to think about as well. But let's talk about high blood sugar. So a state of high blood sugar means that damage is caused to the vessels that supply blood to our vital organs. And that is what causes the increased risk of heart disease, kidney disease, vision problems, nerve problems, healing problems, all of those issues that people get from diabetes, ulcers that won't heal, operation sites that just won't get better. And these things are all due to high blood sugar. And the quickest way to get high blood sugar is obviously to consume a lot of simple carbohydrates. It's the fastest way, and that will bring us to glycemic index, right? Now, I think it was a whole thing for a while, right? GI foods. It was a whole separate, you know, along with the gluten-free came the low GI diet. Now, this is just a very simplified version. So basically, the more simple the carbohydrate, the faster it goes into your blood sugar and the faster it is utilized and absorbed, which is all fine until we start talking about overconsumption. This is how it would normally work in the body. Now, if you look at the high GI carbs, which are like simple sugars, you know, like a lot of cake, pizza is very high GI as well. Anna's going to have a bit of a chuckle after the weekend. Mim and pizza, that's a whole discussion. So basically these are the foods that are going to be absorbed super quick and are also going to be gone super quick as well. And when it's gone super quick, that gives you the urge to eat again because blood sugar goes up, insulin lets blood sugar into the cells, blood sugar goes down and the body is like, I need more sugar. If you have something that is a medium GI food, then obviously you pull out that curve a little more, and then a low GI food is something that ekes it out even more. So yeah, and it's not only carbohydrates that will have a GI effect as well. So that's important to know. So let's have a little bit of a look here at certain types of food and what their glycemic index are. Remembering that this is not the be all and end all, right? That's not necessarily, but you know, as a general rule, the less healthy the carbohydrate, the higher GI it is. But that's only a general rule. So say something like watermelon. Watermelon has a GI of 72. So that is quite high. However, there are a lot of good things in watermelon, right? So we shouldn't just simplify foods down to their GI. And you can slow down the absorption of carbohydrate by combining food with other food as well, right? And that's also a whole new nutrition series that you could do too about what combinations you should have of certain foods. Okay, so having a look at types of carbohydrates, and I want to just highlight here as well, what most people don't realize is that vegetables are carbohydrates. A lot of the times we group vegetables as being their own separate macronutrient, right? You have fats, carbs, proteins, and vegetables. But actually vegetables, being from a plant source, have a high fiber. Most vegetables are really high in fiber. Which means that there's not a lot of the vegetable that you can actually digest. That will be left up to your gut bacteria. So there's not a lot of energy that you can get out of them, which is why they tend to be lower GI. And then fruits, obviously, because they contain a lot of fructose, which is a simple sugar, they're going to be somewhat higher in GI. But what slows them down is the fact that they contain fiber. And we're always talking about, you know, having not having carbohydrates that are in their separate form. If you separate the sugar from the fiber, that's when you end up getting issues, right? So your fruits, yes, they're higher in carbohydrates, but they have fiber with them. And something like a watermelon is quite high fiber and a lot of water as well, right? So actually, even in a low carbohydrate diet, we can make room for something that is so high GI as well. Because there's a lot of fiber in that food as well, remembering that fiber is yet another carbohydrate and something that is very important for our health. Is there anything on there that somebody is surprised about in terms of... Shoot, Ma.
Yeah, about the low-fat yogurt.
Yeah.
Is 14.
Mm-hmm.
But skim milk and whole milk is lower than skim milk, but low-fat yogurt is lower than plain yogurt. No, not plain yogurt.
No, it's not.
Plain yogurt is the same.
Yeah, they're the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so the main carbohydrate in milk is lactose, right? That's what, you know, people that drink lactose-free milk and stuff. But lactose is a carbohydrate. It's a sugar. It's milk sugar. Now, when you ferment milk, the bacteria utilize the milk sugar. And that's what they, because, you know, fermentation is the breakdown of sugar. And then when the bacteria break down the sugar in in milk, it becomes yogurt. So there is less carbohydrates in it than what there would be with milk, right? So that's why that's lower. But when it comes to milk, skim milk, fat-free milk, well, I'm pretty sure they're the same, right? And then when you've got normal milk, whole milk, because whole milk has a lot more fat in it, fat doesn't raise GI.
No.
So there's a lot more milk sugar, because once you take out the fat, that has to be replaced by something, and that is then replaced by lactose. So that's why you'll get a higher GI from a low-fat milk than you will from a whole milk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this, because this is really important and something that really irks people on a low carbohydrate diet as well. We cannot forget carbohydrates' role in mood. You know, like I said this morning as well, I say carbs, people think cake, and people go, happy food, right? Because actually it does create a dopamine reaction in your body. That is the feel-good neurotransmitter that we have. So yes, carbohydrates actually do make you feel happy. It is just a fact. It's also the fact that it's easy for your body to use dietary carbohydrates. So you get a quicker reaction, you get more energy faster, especially if your body is used to utilizing a lot of carbohydrates. If it doesn't have them, it's slow to react on breakdown of fat to produce carbohydrates, right? So that is why we tend to like to train our bodies to be able to break down fats to be able to generate energy as well. But it is also something that can be a concern in a low carbohydrate diet, that you do feel a little bit, you know, you don't feel happy, especially the first week. The first week, you know, you can experience something called keto flu, which is not a lot of fun as well. But usually that is due to the fact that when you do not consume many carbohydrates, your body lets go of a lot of water. And when your body lets go of a lot of water, it tends to let go of a lot of minerals as well. And it's that lack of minerals like magnesium, sodium, potassium, that kind of thing, that can really make you feel a bit and fluey, right? Not to mention getting muscle cramps and stuff from lack of magnesium, but that is what they call like a keto flu. And people who have been doing a ketogenic diet long-term can also experience a little bit of depression, to which the solution sometimes is to add a little bit of dietary carbohydrate in the form of healthy carbohydrates, of course, which we're going to talk about in a second. Maybe some sweet potato or you know, like a vegetable pumpkin that's slightly higher in carbohydrates. And doing that will actually just kickstart that feel-good factor in your brain. Now, there is something else that is really, that people kind of go, to when I mention it, and that is tryptophan. So tryptophan, that's the last thing on my list here. Tryptophan was really known from that turkey is high in tryptophan, right? And that it makes you sleepy. And that's the reason that after you have a big Christmas meal or a big Thanksgiving meal, that you feel so sleepy. But what they didn't know at that time is actually it's carbohydrate that can hinder all of the amino acids but tryptophan. And when you get a lot of tryptophan, you get sleepy, which is also a lot of the time the reason that people who don't sleep through, people that wake up in the middle of the night and take the trip to the fridge and stand in front of the fridge, because if you eat something high carbohydrate, then that will actually help you go back to sleep, right? Because of the action that carbohydrates have on all amino acids except for tryptophan. So a lot of people can get stuck in that addictive behavior as well, because they know that if they wake up and they go to the fridge and they eat something, then they will get sleepy and then be able to go back to sleep again as well. But, you know, there are multiple problems with eating just before you go to sleep. Namely that your body is trying to rest and it's also trying to digest at the same time. So that means that you will have a long-term impact on your resting. Good. Okay, so this is going to be my last slide and I've probably gone over time, haven't I? Oh, no, not yet. Well, 1 minute. Okay, this will... the good carbs and the bad carbs, because we had to talk about this, right? And it's very different talking about, you know, everyone has their opinion about carbs, right? Some people swear by not eating them, even though you can't avoid them. There's no way that you can avoid them. You can eat low carbohydrate, but you can't avoid carbohydrate unless you put straight protein into your stomach, which I think has also been one of those weight loss gigs that's been, oh, I know, right? And because protein isn't particularly nice tasting, they were doing these like feeding tubes where, yeah, I know, right? Oh dear. Things, you know, the lengths that people go to. But of course, you know, cutting a food group out will always put you at higher risk of nutritional deficiencies. Now, that doesn't mean that if you feel like it's the right thing to do to not eat animal products, that you shouldn't do it. You just need to be more aware of the fact that you may run into some nutritional deficiencies. It's all about awareness. So it's, you know, when it comes to low carbohydrate diets, though, you're not really cutting out a whole lot of carbs that are seen as good carbs. Because if we look at good carbs, then we're talking about fruit and vegetables, right? Pretty much. And we all know that fruit and vegetables are some of the healthiest things that we can eat. You know, that's why we don't like them as much as we like cake and bagels. Yeah. Yeah, look, they're less palatable, and although, you know, fruit can definitely be something that is very easy to eat. However, I think I've spoken on numerous occasions about fruit availability and the importance of seasonality when you're eating as well. It is not a natural state for you to eat the same type of fruit the whole year around. You know, it was always a seasonal thing. And we were talking about that, I think, last week with, you know, when it's strawberry season in Europe, or when it's raspberry season or cherry season, which I think is like 1.5 days, and otherwise they taste like crap. But yeah. So that's definitely something. But I mean, bad carbs, I don't have to go into this. You guys know what they are. They're pizza, they're bagels, they're burgers, they're all of those things that are highly processed and highly palatable and salted and sugared and food chemicals up to the eyeballs. You know, I think in this day and age, a lot of people don't have any problems with identifying what is a good carb or what is a bad carb. And then we get into the difficult discussion. What about healthy whole grains? Because for years and years and years, especially, you know, I can remember that was the main rhetoric when it came to food advertising when I was, say, in high school all the way through till maybe even a couple of years ago. And I still see it today. You should increase your amount of healthy whole grains. Yes, whole grains can definitely be a part of a healthy diet. But you have to make sure that at some point in your day that you do reach a point of depletion in your body's stores so that you can at some point access the body's stores. Because if we don't do that, we don't train the body to do that, and there's no way that you can ever make your body good at being able to use your fat stores. Now, I think at some point in time, all of us have had a period of time where perhaps we had a little bit more body fat than what we wanted to. And this should be a flux, right? I mean, there was always a lot of talk about how yo-yo dieting is really bad. And yes, yo-yo dieting is really bad if you are restricting a lot. And then once you stop restricting, you go overboard on a lot of bad food. Yeah, that's definitely something that is really bad. But if you look from an evolutionary sense, we would have had a yearly expansion and a yearly contraction. That was just what happened. Because in the summer, there was plentiful food. We ate it, we put on weight, and in the winter, there wasn't so much availability. We had to survive on what was around. And we naturally contracted as our body fat was being used. So actually, this is a very natural state for your body to be in. And being able to switch from a burning to a storage mode is also something that your body was designed to do. The only thing is we only ever store these days. We don't go to burn. So how do we burn? Well, number one, you have to deplete your glycogen stores. That's the only way. And how can you do that? Well, number one way would be to undereat on your body's energy requirements, right? Which is the standard rhetoric for losing weight. Eat less, move more. Calorie expenditure goes up, calorie intake goes down, and that is how you create a deficit and utilize your body fat. This has been used for years now. It's not a great ongoing strategy simply because it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all. And we see that because 99% of low calorie diets fail. It's just part of the way that we are. And for all of us that are beating ourselves up on low calorie diets and now you're still the same or heavier than what you were before you started, that is normal. That is normal. That's just the way that the body was designed to go. So stop beating yourself up about it. It's just the wrong strategy. That's all. So the other way that you can deplete your glycogen stores is to not replenish them for a long time. And that's when we get into fasting. So fasting, of course, apart from a reduction in body fat, has many other things that are beneficial to the body in terms of detoxification, in terms of improving the quality of your life, and also the healing that can be done when you're not busying your body with digestion. So that's another way that you can do that. And then the third one, which all of us will be very aware of if you've been to a foundations ride with me, is creating a glycogen vacuum by utilizing it as fuel, right? You know, when we used to do the foundations rides, I know Pete does them on a Friday morning as well. And that foundations ride, when you start going over the 40 to 45 minute mark, that's when you can really start to deplete a lot of the glycogen stores, and you can start switching your body off into a fat burning mode. And that's also a training that you can do, right? So it's moderate training, sustained training, and just running down the glycogen stores so that the body comes to a point, you know, that point at the 35 to 40 minute mark when everyone's motivation kind of drops and you're kind of like, when is this going to be over? Then you smile and you go, yeah, it's working. And so exercise is a great way to start creating that deficit, which is, it's actually much better at doing that than it is as being a tool to correct an overeating. So that's also where fasted exercise comes into it as well, simply because these workouts are what we call moderate workouts. They're not activating anaerobic energy systems, which is where you need quick sugar from. If you can keep it in that moderate energy zone, that's when you're able to sustain efforts for a long time. And that's where you can get a lot of this exercise done. And the more that you do fasted workouts, the better you will get at it as well. Your body just gets better and better at fasting. When I first started fasting, I thought I was dying by the time I had to eat. And, you know, I've always been someone that considers myself as getting grumpy and hangry when I need to eat. But these days, you know, I can easily go to 1, 2, 3 in the afternoon, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to have lunch now. That doesn't mean that I consume any less calories than what I would in a full day of eating, but that is pretty much, then it's just condensed into a smaller amount of time. And then I give my body like quite a bit of time before I eat again so that I can deplete my glycogen stores and get into my body fat reserves. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, then I'm going to thank everyone. Remember, you can always message me if you have questions that pop up. Then I'm going to thank you all for joining us again for another nutrition talk. I am doing my seminar on Tuesday evening, and it's going to be my seminar on emotional eating. So we're going to address emotional eating and triggers, and also strategies that we can implement to stop that kind of behavior, because it's something that creates a lot of shame in people, and talking about it really kind of helps, helping people understand that actually eating a lot when you're not feeling very good is the body's natural reaction, and it's okay. So please do join me for that if you have time on Tuesday evening, and otherwise we will record it and put it on NamaStream as well. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's great seeing you all again, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.